Arguably one of the most iconic novels ever written, Bram Stokers' Dracula is a gothic tale of horror, hidden sexuality, the lust for blood, and the living dead. Although a work of pure fiction, Stoker wrote from what he knew. He weaved a myriad of truth, imagination, and popular culture to create a masterpiece that is as powerful today as it was over a century ago. Few people who have not read the novel are aware that Stoker used very real locations as the backdrop to his story, namely Whitby, London, and, of course, Transylvania. These locations are so clearly described, it is possible, even today, to walk in the footsteps of the Count. Dracula begins with the Count's purchase of a series of properties around London. The largest of his houses was an old ruined mansion called Carfax, situated 16 miles from the city near the Essex village of Purfleet.
At Purfleet on a by-road, I came across just such a place as seemed to be required. It was surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure built of heavy stones, and had not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy old oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, no doubt a corruption of the old Quatre Faces, as the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. There are many trees on it, which make it in places gloomy, and there is a deep, dark-looking pond or small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house, only recently added to and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds.
In the 1890s, Purfleet was a small village a few miles outside of London, yet still within easy reach by train. Its centre was the Royal Hotel, which had a garden that backed onto the river to form a beach where families would go and enjoy Sunday afternoons at what they called Little Southend. The town was surrounded by picturesque walks that had chalk cliffs and panoramic views of the Thames, as well as plentiful tea shops and places to spend the night.
Purfleet, we know, was a tourist attraction in the late Victorian period. It's facilitated by a major railway line from London, the London-Tilbury Southend Railway. We know a lot of people came from London to holiday, maybe only a half-day holiday or a whole-day holiday, because it didn't have many long holidays, but there were facilities, cafes, hotels, and it's quite likely that Bram Stoker would have visited. There's also a very strong link through the theatre. Of course, Bram Stoker was the assistant manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London, and we know on Sundays theatre in London was closed, and often the theatre staff and the thespians would come out together to go somewhere, and that link of Purfleet being a tourist attraction may have drawn Bram Stoker and his friends and associates down here.
But what was it Stoker saw that may have inspired him? What real-life mysterious building became the dark, crumbling mansion of the novel?
The linkage with Purfleet and the Dracula novel is that there are at least two buildings which you could identify, one as Carfax House and one as the lunatic asylum, which in the novel are meant to be fairly close together. One of the strongest links is the Carfax House and Purfleet House. It's the only house in Thurrock which actually has a chapel of ease associated with it. Quite unusual. You would only find that situation in an aristocratic type building, and Purfleet House actually has that. And in the storyline, of course, Dracula comes down and moves his boxes of earth through Whitby down to Carfax House, and they're left in the chapel. It's almost too strong a link to think otherwise, that in all the other places around Purfleet, maybe within 20, 30 miles, there's no other situation where there's a large house which has its own chapel associated with it. Purfleet House was built fairly close to the edge of the river, but it's actually built into the quarry, a chalk quarry, associated with Purfleet. Lots of these quarries were being dug from the 17th century onwards. And of course, when you get to the deepest part of the chalk extraction, you actually start to get water welling up. So there may have been water associated in the garden area where the house was associated. There's also the river itself. But there's also a stream which flows down to one side of the area of Purfleet called the Mardyke. So there's water and river associated all in that environment. And again, this could be something that Bram Stoker observed and introduced into his storyline.
Another key building in the novel is the private asylum run by Dr. John Seward, home to R.M. Renfield, a disturbed patient under the influence of Count Dracula, who attempts to obtain the life force of various creatures by eating insects and birds.
In the novel, the association between Carfax House and the lunatic asylum are mentioned. It's interesting that Purfleet House is dug into the back of a quarry area, so it's quite low down. There's a steep chalk quarry face, maybe 100 feet high. An ordnance house, which we identify as the lunatic asylum, is only just over the brow, so it's within spitting distance almost, but you can't actually quite see it. Ordnance House was a very substantial building, the headquarters of the military establishment at Purfleet, and because it was a very secure area for the storage of gunpowder, there were high security brick walls, an outer perimeter wall, an inner security wall, and these can be linked to the storyline of the lunatic escaping and trying to leap over the walls, and fits in very nicely with also the juxtaposition between the closeness of the lunatic asylum and Carfax House. In Purfleet today, you can't see either of the two buildings identified in the novel. Purfleet House was knocked down in the 1920s to make way for redevelopment for a new church for Purfleet, and Ordnance House in the military establishment was destroyed in the 1970s to make way for new housing. So sadly, neither of these buildings can be seen today.
Although Purfleet and ordnance houses no longer exist, Purfleet still has buildings of note. The Chapel of Ease associated with Purfleet House still stands in a hollow beneath the chalk cliff that obscured the military garrison and ordnance house. Partly destroyed by fire in 2001, what remains is an eerie collection of buildings that have been left to the mercy of time and the elements. Here, more than anywhere else in Purfleet, it is very easy to imagine Dracula returning to his earth-filled boxes. The connection between the town and the novel has been commemorated with a plaque on the wall surrounding St. Stephen's Church on the site of Purfleet House. The church itself has been built using materials reclaimed from Samuel Whitbread's original house. The clock tower, complete with part of the imposing security walls, is a reminder of Purfleet's military heritage, while the new housing estate to the north of the town, built around the site of Ordnance House, still has clues to its military past in its various street names. Clues in the novel suggest that Carfax is located just outside the village rather than in its centre. Interestingly, there was also a manor house situated 1.5 miles from Purfleet in the parish of Avley. Belhouse Manor was very much like the description of Carfax in the novel. It was surrounded by a brick wall with towers and an imposing gatehouse. It even had a lake, the Long Pool, which was originally a feature of Capability Brown's landscape gardens. At the time Stoker may have seen it, the house had a dark, Gothic feel and would have almost certainly caught his imagination. Belhouse Manor suffered bomb damage during World War II and fell into disrepair until it was finally demolished in 1957. Today, only the outline of some of the foundations remain, and the former grounds are now a golf course. We may never know for sure exactly which buildings Bram Stoker had in mind when he was writing his famous novel. The only written record of his research are his working notes, now housed in the Rosenbach collection in Philadelphia. Although they contain a wealth of information about many aspects of the novel, sadly there are no clues which shed further light upon the precise location of the buildings in Purfleet upon which he may have based Carfax or Dr. Seward's asylum, or why he chose the town as a location. One thing is sure. Like all good stories, much of Dracula's power comes from Stoker's ability to weave fiction with reality and fact. Although the events it describes are an invented story, the names, places, and details are all very real. Dracula himself may only be a character in a novel, but it is possible, even today, to walk in his literary footsteps. Thanks to Bram Stoker, Dracula and Purfleet are now inseparable.